Hello, this screencast is meant to be a review of Sentence Bootcamp and also reteaching for those of you who were absent from class the day we covered all of this. I hate doing these screencasts, so you really know I love you when you get a screencast. What I want you to do first is set up your notes. So take out a piece of notebook paper and then create a space where you can do all 4 of these things as I get to it. So go ahead and pause this and start it again when you're ready to write some things down and fill in all of this stuff in your notes. Okay, so the first thing I want you to write down is I want you to list the 3 most common sentence errors. So pause the recording again and see if you can come up with these 3 common sentence errors. They are comma splice, fragment, run-on. I absolutely expect that you know what these 3 things are. Comma splice might be the one that's least familiar, and a comma splice is when a writer tries to combine 2 sentences together with just a comma. So both sides of the comma could be a sentence all on their own. And instead of using comma conjunction or a semicolon, the student just uses the comma, and that's a mistake. It's called a comma splice, and it's really common. So we're going to be dealing with that this year. A fragment is a sentence that is incomplete for whatever reason. Just an incomplete sentence is considered a fragment. This is less common. I'm seeing this less and less in student writing, which is a good thing, but still something we'll talk about. And then the run-on sentence. And here is why we're going to focus on the run-on. One is because I want to know, how do you identify run-ons? If I gave you a paragraph and I said, find the run-on sentence, how would you know the difference between a run-on or just a really long, beautifully written, complex sentence? Like, can you truly tell the difference? And when I asked people in class, I kind of got the sense that the answer is no, which doesn't surprise me. And so when I ask students, hey, how do you avoid run-on sentences in your writing? Their answer tends to be, I just don't write very long sentences. And that right there is the problem. I want you to be able to write long, beautiful, complex sentences, but still avoid the mistakes of a run-on sentence. So for all the points, that's a joke because we don't have points anymore in the gradebook, but identify what 3 things a sentence must have to be considered complete. So pause this and see if you can get all 3 before I tell you on the next slide. The 3 things a sentence needs to be: complete, subject, verb, and complete thought. Okay, so you probably got the subject in the verb, or I hope you got the subject in the verb. By the way, I say verb, and a lot of other people say predicate. Kind of means the same thing. Predicate means verb or verb phrase. And when I say verb, I mean verb or verb phrase. So subject, verb, complete thought. Why complete thought? Why is this even on the list? Can you have a subject and a verb but not a complete thought? Obviously, yes, you can. That's why we have to say a sentence needs a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. So here's what you have to know. You have to know the definition of clause. Like, you have to have it memorized, not just the ability to find it on a multiple choice exam, but to actually write it down. So if I said, write down the definition of a clause, you would be able to do this. And here it is. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. So go ahead and pause this recording and write that down, and then say it out loud several times. That's what we did in class. I made students repeat it back to me 3 or 4 times. So a clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. Hopefully you have that written down. So let's test your knowledge. Which of the following of these are clauses? Go ahead and pause, and hopefully you can see, or you have decided already, which of these are clauses. Here are the answers: B and D. B is a clause because it is a group of words that have a subject and a verb. Where's the verb? Ended. Who or what ended? The storm. So there's your subject. So subject, verb. His bright blue shirt is not a clause. We would consider that a phrase. That's what we'll just call, in this class, that's what we'll call anything that's not a clause. We'll just call it a phrase. When you take advanced grammar in college, you can learn a different way, but for now that works. So his bright blue shirt is not a clause because it does not have a verb, right? And anytime you look at a group of words to try to decide if it's a clause or independent clause or dependent clause, you should always find the verb first. And what I told classes today was I absolutely expect that you can already do this. So I could give you any sentence and you could tell me if it is, or you could find the verb, you could locate the verb. If you cannot do this or you're not confident in your ability to do this, you need to get extra support. So come in office hours and talk to me and we will go over how to find the verb in a sentence. Once you find the verb in a sentence, it is pretty easy to find the subject. All you do is ask who or what is doing the verb. So for this one, we go, ended is the verb, who or what ended, the storm ended. So you have subject, the storm, ended, the verb. D is also a clause. We tiptoed quietly. Where is the verb? Tiptoed. Who tiptoed? We tiptoed. Subject, verb. This one is also a complete thought. So you could put a period right here and that one could stand alone as a sentence. Unlike B, which is also a clause, verb, subject, but is not a complete thought. This one has an incomplete thought and cannot stand alone as a sentence. So a clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. Obviously you can't discuss because you're probably by yourself, but I want you to pause this and really think about the meaning of the word dependent and the meaning of the word independent. So in class, we talked about the difference between independent people and dependent people and how independent people can really take care of themselves. They don't rely on anyone else or anything else to sort of like keep them alive or keep them afloat. Whereas dependent people depend on others or something else to help them out. So if you know the definition of those two words, it will be much easier to remember what is a dependent clause and what is an independent clause. So an independent clause is a clause that can stand alone. It has the complete thought, and it can be a sentence if it wants to be. Dependent clauses are groups of words that have a subject and a verb, but not a complete thought. Dependent clauses need something else to finish their thought. They rely on another clause to finish their thought, so that makes them dependent. So out of these, you're going to identify which ones are independent and which ones are dependent. So go ahead and hit pause and think through these. Okay, so Susie eats cheese and bread, that's independent. Although Susie prefers ice cream is dependent. The Seahawks are the best in the NFL, that's true, but also an independent clause. And they will win the Super Bowl, that is my hope, but also an independent clause. So you can see independent clauses can just be sentences, and dependent clauses need something to finish their thought. So the next step in the lesson is going to be joining clauses together. So that's what we're going to talk about next, and we're going to talk about conjunctions and fanboys and swabbies and all of that, but that is going to be an entirely separate video or screencast. The last point that I want to make is over here with dependent and independent clauses. So I said that dependent clauses cannot stand alone as a sentence, but what I have found is that students really struggle determining whether or not like a group of words could be its own sentence. So one strategy that I teach students who struggle with this, like if you can do this on your own, then you don't need this strategy and you can just keep doing it on your own. But if you struggle, one tip that might help you is putting the words I believe in front of the clause, and if it makes sense or kind of makes sense, then it's a complete thought. If it doesn't make sense at all, then it's an incomplete thought. So let's try it out. his bright blue shirt. I believe his bright blue shirt. That doesn't make sense. So you know for sure, if you didn't know before, that this is an incomplete thought. After the storm ended. I believe after the storm ended. Like that doesn't make sense at all. So you know, not a complete thought. I believe quickly spinning in circles. Doesn't make sense. Not a complete thought. I believe we tiptoed quietly. That does make sense. And so therefore, you know that this is a complete thought. We can try it with these as well. I believe Susie eats cheese and bread. Makes sense. Independent clause, complete thought. Good. I believe, although Susie prefers ice cream. Does not make sense. So therefore, that's another way that you can determine that this is a dependent clause. It does not have the complete thought. So hopefully that helps you. Hopefully you wrote down the definition of clause, the definition of dependent clause, independent clause, and you can now explain the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause. If you cannot do it, push stop and start the recording over until you are able to do those things. You should also know what 3 things a sentence needs in order to be complete and have those in your notes. And I hope you wrote down the I believe tip or strategy, because that will come in handy later as well.